It is it's 8:01 now, okay? So we're officially at 8:01 on a Friday morning. It is October the 14th. I am first warning meteorologist Eric Burris. Thank you for joining on Coffee Talk. We get together 7 days a week. We chat about what's going on in the world of weather. Sometimes we chat about life when the weather's a little quieter. And basically just try to get your day started off on the right note. And with as much bright sunshine as you can, whether or not it's sunny outside, which it happens to be today. So yay for us, right? Front kind of drying things out and we're enjoying. Top two things we're monitoring today will be that weekend forecast. Obviously, we have a lot to talk about with Biketoberfest in town. There are parades downtown. There's a lot going on. We are going to be discussing that, plus tracking the tropics, and not just what's going on now, but today is a unique coffee talk in that we're going to have Craig Setzer, who's a meteorologist down in Miami, to not only talk about the tropics now, but kind of as a whole, see how things are and discuss somebody who's very much in the weeds of tropical meteorology, kind of the messaging aspect. Because as television meteorologists, our job is to convey the message. And is it the best way possible? Are there things that we could do? Does the viewer understand? There's a lot to talk about. So we'll get to him in just a couple of seconds' time. I don't want to keep him waiting too long. But before we move on, remember, Coffee Talk also now a podcast. So if you miss us live this morning on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter, you can also get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and the iHeart app. Okay? All right, enough of that self-advertising garbage. Let's look outside, see what's doing. Shall we? Look at that. New Smyrna Beach. There's your moment of zen. It is a Friday, the weekend right around the corner. Temperatures are looking fantastic this morning. They will be looking fantastic through the weekend as well. We are in the 60s in our northern spots. New Smyrna, you're sitting at 70, but with that breeze, it feels just outstanding, doesn't it? 72 degrees in Orlando. It's 70 degrees Leesburg. Area-wide, we are looking fantastic. Our first warning, live Doppler radar, fired up, getting a bunch of ground clutter. Why? Because there's no actual rain in the atmosphere. And for a Friday, I'll take it. So we have had a little patchy fog here or there. We'll keep that at least in the mention this morning. But sun comes up, mixes the atmosphere. We look great. 85 degrees, our 1 o'clock temperature. And friends, that's like our high temperature for the day. It looks right about average, which to me is a better than average scenario, you ask me. A sprinkle or two possible, but really and truly it's going to be fantastic this afternoon. About 85, 86 in the metro, which is again right about average. A little warmer out west, a little cooler along the coastline. Here's Futurecast, and look at that. A mix of clouds and sun. Gorgeous. Maybe a sprinkle or two around Brevard County, Osceola County. Here or there, a shower in our southern spots because that front is still sitting over top of us, okay? So that's kind of an overall look at what's going on right now. That said, I want to take and get to our guest and bring in Craig Setzer. Craig, for those of you that do know, super cool guy. For those of you that don't know, Craig served as a meteorologist at several stations in Florida. He was the chief meteorologist at WFOR in Miami. And Craig, first off, good morning to you, sir. Did I lose your audio? Oh, no. Are you muted on your side? You're not. Oh, that's so random. All right, Craig, go ahead and call back. We'll try that again. But while Craig's working on that, let me just tell you about who Craig is. So he was a meteorologist in Tampa, meteorologist down in Miami. And, it's one thing when you're a meteorologist in Miami because you work so closely with the National Hurricane Center. Craig, I think I can hear you now.
Yes. How about that?
Hi, buddy. How are you? Good morning.
Good.
All right. First off, thank you for joining.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So, real fast for folks that don't know you, give a Cliff's Notes of your track record.
So I started off a long time ago when chasing wasn't cool before the movie Twister came out. Back then we used to chase in basically a carriage with a horse so long ago, chasing tornadoes. And I was really more of a severe weather meteorologist. I went to the University of Oklahoma, and of course that was big tornado country and big tornado school there. And ended up in Colorado for many years and loved it, and great lifestyle there. And then in 1996, after catching a really big tornado, and the movie Twister had come out and tornado chasing had then started to become the thing, a station in Tampa reached out to me and said, "Hey, we need a tornado chaser on staff." And I said, "Well, I'm your guy." So they hired me, and I was at WFLA in Tampa, 96. And then in 99, I was at a hurricane conference and ran into a gentleman by the name of Brian Norcross of Hurricane Andrew fame. And he said, "Hey, I could use you in Miami." So in 2000, January of 2000, I moved to Miami, and I've been here ever since. I was at WFOR, the CBS affiliate, for 22 years.
Wow.
And then last winter, I thought, you know what? I'm going to try something different. So, like that scary thing that some people do when they're a little bit crazy, I jumped into the air and now doing lots of things, which I really enjoy. One is what's called forensic meteorology. I'm working with attorneys to try to reconstruct weather events that could have impacted people. Another thing I'm doing is working on helping the Hurricane Center with getting their video stream project up. They were able to use it pretty effectively during Ian, and we're looking for bigger and better things now. So not to put competition on you, Eric.
Oh gosh, no.
I'm trying to make their product look really, really good. And then I just do lots of conferences where I kind of talk about the messaging of hurricanes, which is really a complex message. There's nothing like it because every single person has a different part of the hurricane message or the hurricane plan that applies to them.
Right.
So it's really, really complex.
Yeah, well, and you also do. Let's do a little shameless plug for you because you also do a lot of Facebook, Twitter Live as well. Tell everybody if they want to find you how they can and kind of what you do as well.
So I'm on YouTube. I wasn't able to get a custom channel yet, but if you look at Craig Setzer Hurricane or something like that, you can probably find me on YouTube. And then I'm on Twitter, and I'm pretty active on Twitter as well. And the handle is just simply at Craig Setzer. On the YouTube channel, I just started it 2 weeks before Ian hit. So it literally was, you can go back and watch the first videos. Please don't. They were it's pretty rocky. But I wanted it to have, like I'm sure you do, Eric, a kind of a nice look to it, not just like some podcast or something like that with some wipes and some dissolves and some different sources. And like you've got the crawl at the bottom of your screen and the ticker. I wanted to have that too. So I did all of them live. Yeah. And now that there's really not much going on in the tropics, I'm posting videos. I just posted one up this morning called Seasonal Hurricane Forecaster Phil Hotspot.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
Yesterday.
So, Craig, I mean, world of information, obviously. My brother, by the way, Frank says, sounds like you might need a graphics guy. He knows that I do a bunch of we can work. I love working together with Craig. So anything that I can do, certainly. Okay.
I could use a graphics guy. Absolutely.
So Craig and I really got to chatting when I went to the conference up in Boston because Craig's presentation, as he had mentioned, was about hurricane forecasting and messaging, and obviously we all love the cone. This is a cone from days before Ian moved toward Florida, but I think, Craig, that this is a good topic because almost 20 years after Hurricane Charlie, and we kind of find societally the same problem from Hurricane Charlie. People felt caught off guard, even though this is days and days before, and Fort Myers is in the cone.
Right. So, what this whole thing, and it's funny because I was sitting in bed last night thinking, about talking to you this morning, and I got so worked up I couldn't go to sleep for like an hour. This really is a passionate project of mine, is to find a better tool to inform people, because the cone, and most people don't see this, it tracks a point. It doesn't track a storm. It tracks a single point on a map, and where that point should be in 5 days time frame within like 67% chance based on 5 years previous skill. The cone doesn't change its size because of the storm getting bigger or smaller. The cone doesn't talk about the wind speed. The cone doesn't talk about the effects. And, I was thinking, Eric, and you could probably relate to this. What if we tracked a blizzard by a point, a single point? And what if we said, the blizzard right now is centered near Grand Rapids and is going to be moving southeast and is going to be near Cincinnati, Ohio, in the Ohio Valley sometime tomorrow afternoon. I mean, people would be like, no, it's a
Right.
blizzard. It's big. There's going to be snow and wind and all kinds of stuff. Why would you use a point to track a blizzard, or even like an Arctic air mass? If I
Right.
said, well, the Arctic air center, the center of the Arctic air is over Rapid City, South Dakota, and it's moving southeast at 20 miles an hour. So, I mean, that doesn't tell people anything except for where the center is, where a point is. So I'm really working to try to change the cone and make it look at least more informative so that people can make decisions on it, because whether folks like it or not, people make decisions on the cone.
Right.
And most people interviewed about their preparations, or if they were watching the storm, they say, we were in the cone, we were out of the cone, we were in the cone, and then we were out of the cone. And they make their choices on that. And that's not the way to go, because the cone is only tracking a point, and the odds of a point hitting you are much lower than the odds of a hurricane. The effects of it hitting you, they're much higher when one's heading your way.
Well, and it's I mean, we know a point is a point, right? And tropical systems have such wide ranging impact. So I pulled up a tweet of yours, and let's just kind of chat about this. You know, this is something that you're trying to point out, kind of an enhanced cone, maybe a dynamic cone, because you're right. People make decisions based on the forecast cone, but if there's no way to truly adjust it, if there's no way to adjust for uncertainty or certainty, or, you know, I feel like the Hurricane Center probably has kind of their hands tied on what this began with 20-something years ago.
Right. And what it began with 20-something years ago, and it's folklore. So, because I wasn't there, but I'll just say what I heard, was that the director of the National Weather Service at the time, that would be the person over the Hurricane Center and in charge of all the centers, he said, we need a tracking graphic. At the time, they were doing 3-day forecast points, and he said, I need something visual to show where the storm's going. And so they kind of scrambled together at the Hurricane Center, and they put together, they said, well, let's do something that's kind of based on our skills. So they made these circles on their average error for 1, 2, and 3 days, and then they connected them with an outside line, and it looked like a cone, which it was. And so we had the first cone in 2002, and it hasn't changed since, except for in 2003, they had been doing the 3-day forecast points for many years. They went to a 5-day forecast point, so the cone got longer. The crazy thing is, if you go to the Hurricane Center website, though, even though it's like 18 years later, or 20 years later, the thing is that they still give you a version of the 3-day cone or the 5-day cone. And most people nowadays wouldn't even know why there's a difference between the 3 or the 5-day cone.
Yeah.
And so there's other things too on the website. And I always liken it to a Waffle House. How would you like your hash browns menu? Because you can have them scattered, you can have them covered, you can have them smothered, you can have them, whatever, crispy. And that's the way you can have your cone. If you look at the page, you can have the 3-day, you can have the 5-day. You can have it with a center line or without a center line. You can have it with watches and warnings or watches and warnings on the side. I mean, it's kind of,
So I find it interesting because in discussions about the forecast cone, people look at that, they make their decisions, but they don't actually, what I have found in independent kind of just asking around, people don't realize what the cone's definition is. Yes, it's the center of circulation, but there's many other elements to that. And Craig, I think the biggest thing that people don't realize is that when the Hurricane Center issues their forecast, and I have just another forecast cone from Ian as it was coming off the coast of Cuba, the forecast cone is built as the center of circulation will pass through this cone 2/3 of the time. That is built into the forecast.
Right. And so it's based on the Hurricane Center's previous 5-year skill. And if the Hurricane Center, and they're very, very good at what they do, and I'm not disparaging the Hurricane Center in any way, and the cone also is good at tracking a point. But we're not dealing with a point. We're dealing with a storm or a hurricane. We're dealing with something much larger than a point. The cone probably would be good if tornadoes went out 5 days.
Right.
Because you've got something relatively small. But we're not talking about something small. So the cone, it doesn't change its size ever. If the storm is tiny, the cone is the same size. If the storm is huge, the cone is the same size. If the storm is kind of turning left and right, the cone is the same size. The cone may turn left and right, but the size of the cone never, ever changes based on any definition of what the storm is doing. It's always the same size.
So the Hurricane Center, a couple of years ago, realizing that maybe it's time to work forward, they started putting together impact-based graphics, and I've got one here that we were using during Ian. This is peak wind potential, and this was an early call, so there's a much larger swath of the kind of higher end winds, but this was the Hurricane Center's way of saying, okay, the cone tracks the center of circulation, but yes, there may be other elements that we need to communicate. And Craig, I know that you have talked a lot about that, and you've incorporated a lot of that into the way that you message in storms.
Right. So I think the thing, first off, let me make clear, is that a change to the cone isn't going to fix everything. But I think a change to the cone, the one that I would like to see, which is where you show where the tropical extent of the tropical storm conditions are, that graphic there. The red area in this case, based on that advisory, would be where the hurricane conditions are. And you can see Cape Coral and Fort Myers down there, right on the edge of the cone, but they're in the hurricane conditions. And there's times when, as you can see, the outline of the cone is there, but the tropical storm conditions extend well outside of the cone as well. So, yeah, kind of zoomed in there. So, some people are like, well, do you need the center line? Well, I don't. You don't have to have the center line, but you really want to show the extent of the yellow and the red there, which are the extent of the conditions, just as a starting point, and get people away from the skinny little line that circles the cone. So, Eric, and you know this. Preparations are based on a timeline. We don't prepare based on how far away a storm is. We start preparing based on a timeline. And usually my timeline is like starting at 5 days. At 5 days, we go from watching it to start at least mentally preparing for it. And Brian Norcross is also big on this idea and this way of thinking. And then at 4 days, maybe then we check our kits and get supplies. And some people do this sooner than others. Some people do it later. The thing is, though, you kind of want your preparations to be slow and methodical and steady. A hurricane is not an urgent event unless you're not paying attention. And then for you, it might be an urgent event. But you want it to be slow and methodical. In day 3, maybe you do a little more preparations. Maybe you're checking your shutters. If you're in any type of evacuation area, you're certainly considering what you might have to do if an evacuation order is given. And so it just steps on. And at any point in the way, you can be like, the storm looks like it's turning. We're going to pause our preparations. Right. But the last thing you want to do is not prepare slowly and steadily and then be surprised and say, I didn't expect that. We never want to say the words, I didn't expect that, when we're talking about a hurricane.
Well, and it's so interesting that you mentioned that. And I'm of course, I'm trying to search my my Twitter. I'm just trying to go back and try and find this. But it was like, when the cone was wanting to shift a little more to the panhandle, and we kept airing this one graphic that is so based on what you're saying. It's like a timeline of, all right, we're 4 days before landfall. We're still watching. We're starting to think about an impact from a storm. What would that mean for us? And it's one of those things where, this is the graphic here. Okay, this was a graphic that we were using, and it's the prep timeline. So, our forecast confidence still relatively low, but we need to be prepping, and it's like, because if there's one thing in preparation, in mitigation, right, it's easier to stop and say, okay, we don't need to do this, than it is to say, holy crow, this thing's going to hit us. And that's why it's like, as the forecast confidence comes into focus, then we can get into the real work, but you need to be working on that timeline. And we were really pushing this a lot during Ian and certainly during other storms, because Florida, Max Mayfield was always so great about saying, it's a quiet season, but it takes one storm to get you. And the perfect example of that would be Hurricane Andrew in your neck of the woods, certainly before you lived down there. But, I think I struggle to hear people say, it turned last second. We had no idea, because days before it was being discussed by the media types, by the National Hurricane Center folks. And so, Craig, this then boils down to, okay, well, if the cone isn't perfect, great, it's not perfect, but how can we as the messengers get that information out better then?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think first off, we have to have a common graphic, and people are like, "Well, if the Hurricane Center changes their graphic, then," and I'm like, "Everybody else will change their graphic. Trust me, nobody wants to be out of step with the Hurricane Center if they've got a new graphic or a new tool that they're showing." So first off, I think we need to get beyond the cone. Now, you'll notice in all my graphics, I still show the outline of the cone because I kind of use it as a reference to say, if you're just following the cone, see in Cape Coral, it doesn't matter if you're in or out of the cone. And then, of course, I do this preps timeline thing, which is first off, when do you need your preps completed by? And that's based on when the tropical storm winds or tropical storm conditions arrive. And then when is it going to be at its worst? And then what are we doing today? What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing the next day? And so originally this was like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Right. Wednesday was the ready to shelter in place. But when it said, I mean, all along, if you're living in an evacuation zone and there's a storm out there, you have to have in the back of your mind, if they give the order, what am I going to do? Because if you're not thinking that and you're in an evacuation zone, you're putting yourself at risk right away. Now, I know in Fort Myers, there was the big Irma effect, which was we prepared for Irma, the whole state prepared for Irma. We evacuated for Irma and we got nothing. And, unfortunately, that's the state of hurricane forecasting. We're not good enough yet to say this is exactly where it's going to go. But where it goes determines how bad the surge will be, the winds will be, the flooding will be, all of that. And until we're better at it, unfortunately, we're going to have to evacuate every now and then, hoping that big one doesn't hit. But if it does, then thankfully we won't be in harm's way. And like we've seen in Fort Myers Beach with multiple fatalities, which is really horrible.
Well, right. And so, Chris Pierce, one of our viewers, says with more than 100 fatalities from this storm, we need better messaging. But I also think that the messaging is only one part. And Craig, you are such in a coastal market. Central Florida has coastal counties, but your biggest cities are right at the beaches. You can't force people to evacuate. And I think that that's the other big thing is one fatality is too many, right? But I find that no matter what the messaging will be, there are people that are just going to say, I've been through this. I don't need to evacuate. I've been through this. And that is another difficult thing for us as the messengers, whether it's on the National Hurricane Center level or on the broadcaster level, which is how do you convey to people that every storm is different?
Right. Yeah, no, and it's natural to just say, well, this looks like blah, 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 or this looks like blah, blah, blah. And early on I was saying, this looks like Charlie, but not Charlie in terms of the impacts. It looks like Charlie in terms of the lesson. And the lesson from Charlie in 2004, for those who don't remember, Orlando had sustained hurricane winds in Charlie because Charlie was so strong when it hit the exact same spot that Ian hit. And it kind of kept itself together as it went up US 17 and went through Arcadia right up through Orlando. And so people who had evacuated to Orlando got hit by hurricane force winds. But the thing was, the lesson of Charlie was that it was forecast to go near Tampa based on the line, the skinny black line in the middle of the cone. And even though Fort Myers and Punta Gorda were in the cone, they received the brunt of it. So the lesson was, if you're on the right side of that storm in this type of situation where you've got this trough digging down and it could want to go to the right, and you've just got to treat it the same way in Fort Myers as you would in Tampa. I know it's a bigger than normal warning area. We've gotten kind of used to the Hurricane Center putting the storms through the goalpost per se, along the Gulf Coast. A storm moving south to north across the east-west coast, that's not as hard of a forecast as one moving oblique at an angle towards the coast. And when there's other uncertainties, the models were all over the place.
Right.
And so that is another reason. Look, the uncertainty is very high on where it's going to go, not on how strong it's going to be, but everybody needs to treat this very, very carefully and don't not pay attention. That's what I kept kind of messaging over here, was that we have got to, no matter what the cone is doing, we have to pay attention to this until it's past us and not let our guard down.
Well, and I'd be willing to bet that people in Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, the Keys, that they were, this is a West Coast storm. Yeah, that's not a problem. I mean, right? Like, that's probably what the general consensus was. We're good.
Well, early on, and it's funny, and I know you're aware of this, is that you kind of sample the people that are listening to you, so they're smarter than everybody
Yeah.
else, right? Because they're in the loop.
Right.
But I always like try to just keep an eye on Twitter to see what people are saying, and just to kind of get a feel for like the social pulse out
Hmm.
there. And I think early on, people were got a little bit on edge here, from what I could tell.
Yeah.
They were because it looked like the cone was at the time going to Fort Myers, and we were in the cone here in South Florida, and so it looked like it was going to be strong too. There was an M stamp, major hurricane, and it was kind of the first one we would be dealing with for the season. So I think we took it pretty seriously over here until it got up to, say, Western Cuba, and then I think everybody was like, it's not going to come here.
Right.
It's going to stay west of us. Unfortunately, the cone, which represents the forecast track, it shifted west because it was biased by the GFS.
Right.
And my feeling is always, you kind of, if you've got a couple of models over you that are fairly reliable, like the UK and especially the Euro, and it's near land, you kind of have to almost give deference to those and put aside the meteorology for a little bit, because those people, number one, would get hit sooner if that right side of the track hits.
Right.
So they need to kind of be more aware, because things are going to change more quickly for them. And the downside is, if you're in the middle of the Gulf, you know what? You're in the middle of the Gulf. You can warn the Panhandle. They still have plenty of time.
Exactly. So. Well, and I think a good lesson too is the fact that, just what you said, no matter what that exact pathway is, like I think about Volusia County by us. I mean, they were shellacked. There were hurricane force sustained winds there. There was a ton of damage.
Right. And even fatalities in your viewing area. I was surprised. I mean, up the East Coast and stuff. I was looking at the Melbourne post-hurricane report, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of fatalities over here. And a lot were elderly people who drowned and were found in their homes drowned.
Well, and when we spoke with the deputy director at the National Hurricane Center during the storm, we knew flooding was going to be a big concern. And when we had talked to him about the bigger concerns, it's like, yeah, there's hurricane gusts in Central Florida, but what's your biggest concern? He said by far and away it was the flooding. And people that have lived in my area a long time can remember Hurricane Donna. And Hurricane Donna took almost the identical pathway as Charlie, as Ian, up Southwest Florida and up through kind of that 17, like you said, up 17 and worked into our area and put down a bunch of flooding. And we saw the same thing with Ian. 20 inches in Volusia County. That's the coastline, because it had kind of pivoted up and around and started lifting more north. And that's why, as you mentioned, Craig, we can't just say, oh, it's like Charlie. It is, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. Each storm has its own unique personality.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I'm always trying to think, how much do you, if you go down that road, when people are like, well, is it going to be like Irma? You don't want to just say, well, I don't know, because, you're the messenger. So you have to say something. But I mean, sometimes in that situation, like in this case, I said, I don't think it's because people were like, well, if we're in a tropical storm conditions here, are we going to have power outages? And I said, I don't think we're going to have power outages like Irma. Right. But that's kind of where it ended. I didn't say anything else about Irma.
Yeah. And everybody's trying to look for those connections. Like, oh, I remember Charlie. So is this, I always say every storm's different, but I have to thank you, because during our conference up in Boston, you had started showing these impact-based graphics that we were discussing, and we really were using them in our coverage. And I think that it helped us convey the message of, in this area, this is kind of, and what I love is that it is Hurricane Center products. It's stuff that they are trying to evolve the cone out, and there's a lot of people, we need to down with the cone. And it's like, well, you've got to use that in your tool chest, but there are other tools that we can put together as well for messaging purposes. And we're not going to, I don't think that as messengers, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we're ever going to be able to stop people from saying we got caught off guard, but we're going to be able to at least get a better message out. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I think there's 4 types of people out there. There are the people that, and of course, we evacuate for water, right? Or if you're living in a mobile home or something like that, or you have special needs, and if the power goes out and you have special needs. So those are the people who evacuate. The rest of us, we hide from the wind. So we hunker down, we ride it out. And there's 4 types of people, I think, in terms of the evacuation areas. They're the people that when they get the order, they're going to leave. Okay, good. We don't need to worry about them. Just make sure they get the message. We're good. There's another group of people that they would leave if they could, but something is keeping them from leaving, whether they're disabled or whether they don't have a place to go or whatever it is. Those people would leave, so they need our help. We need to figure out a social net that will get those people and get them out of harm's way. And they don't have to go out of the state. They just have to get out of the evacuation zone. And then there's the third group of people, and these are the people that say, I'm not leaving no matter what. I am staying, and you can't make me leave. You know what? You don't deal with those people anymore because you're not going to change. You're not going to affect them. Don't waste your time on them. And then there's this 4th group of people that I'm trying to reach. Those are the people that are like, well, I would have left, but I didn't know this was going to happen.
Yes.
So those are the people I'm trying to reach with the messaging that this is what's going to happen. Make your decision based on what we are pretty sure is going to happen, or at least if it happens, it's going to be very bad. So you have to make your decision based on that.
I love it. Craig, thank you so much, buddy, for joining us this morning.
Sure, thank you.
Where can everybody find you on the social media channels? Let's do a shameless plug.
Yeah. So I'm not on Facebook because the last time I tried to log on Facebook, it said, please record your face at different angles. And I'm like, no. And then it said on Facebook, don't worry, we'll delete the recording afterwards. I'm like, yeah, after you've extracted every bit of biometrics out of me, no thank you. And so unfortunately, I'm not on Facebook, but I am on Twitter at Craig Setzer, and also on YouTube. You can probably find me there. I've got live videos and videos that now I'm producing and posting.
Craig does a very similar format to this, and brings his level of expertise, which is, I love chatting with Craig because just like I love, and I'm sure you would agree, I love working with other meteorologists because everybody has different perspectives on things. And so, you take his experience, you take my experience, you take Norcross's experience, and you can kind of blend it all together and you're better for it. So, Craig, thank you, buddy. We're going to have you on at some point down the future, hopefully.
Sure. Can I give a shameless plug to you?
If you want to.
So all of the cool things you see on Twitter and on the air, like where the tracking plots and the intensity plots, Eric does all of that with code that he has written to strip out the information and present it in a way that's very visually friendly. And I think you're one of the few in the country that do that. And kudos to you. You do a great job with that.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. For that, I'll have to throw the code your way so that you can do it as well. Just don't share it.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Craig. Have a great morning, buddy.
Okay. You too. Thanks.
All right, everybody. Craig Setzer, wonderful, wonderful guy, brilliant meteorologist. I highly, highly, highly suggest giving him a follow because, let's face it, you could learn a lot. So there's that. All right. Well, let's chat and check about the tropics right now because, there are things that are to be monitored. Here's a look outside. There, of course, is Tropical Storm Carl doing a pretty decent job at convection this morning. We take a look at the forecast cone from the Hurricane Center, expected to make landfall this weekend and weekend. The good news is no threat to us in Central Florida. Elsewhere in the tropics, there is one area to monitor way on the right-hand side there. A low-end chance of tropical development there. 20% likelihood that gets going. So that is good news. A reminder, we were talking about the long-range seasonal forecasting, and just a reminder, there is indications, and I'll just show this to you again, there is continuing indications that first week in November may have something to watch Gulf Coast. Not exactly sure of positioning yet. It's kind of coming into focus a little bit, but, just something early November that the BSR is continuing to show. When did I turn into a weather nerd? Just followed. There you go. See, Crystal, you're a weather nerd now. I love it. Listen, if you're here for Coffee Talk, odds are you're a weather nerd, one way, shape, or form, right? And I'm here for it. I love it. Oh, over on YouTube, Pussycat says, hands down, Eric is the best meteorologist ever. Well, thank you. I appreciate that so much. So much. All right. So let's talk about our 7-day forecast, my friends, because the weekend is here. We need to make sure everybody is prepared for beautiful weather. Oh, I love it. For right now, it looks like this weekend, yeah, it's not going to be cool in the afternoons, but the morning lows at least come down a couple of ticks. Looking ahead to next week, looking at some rain, especially late Monday into Tuesday, and then clearing out. And What's this? 70s in the afternoon? I'm here for it. 50s in the morning? Are you kidding? Let's hope that holds. But for right now, model data does look like we've got ourselves a decent cold front. And I'm so okay with that. Fall is here. And by the way, we are indeed transitioning into that new LRC cycle. So we are watching things very, very closely. All right? All right, listen, it's 8:36. If you missed today's discussion, today's a really good one. Brent, both on YouTube and on Facebook, says, I forget Eric reads both chats. I see both your comments, buddy boy. Today's going to be a good one if you missed it, to go back and check it out on the podcast platforms, Coffee Talk with Eric Burris. Janet says, my daughter is visiting, and I told her I was watching you because I'm a weather nerd. She knows I love it. Michelle's excited for the cold front. Janice and Kimberly excited for the cold front. Me too. I just love the change in season. That's all. That's what I'm most excited about. All right, listen. Be the sunshine in someone else's day, huh? Be good. Have a wonderful day. I will see you guys and gals. I've got Lake Howell High School Alumni Band, so I'm going to try and do a 3:30 afternoon coffee talk. I can't promise it, but I'll try. All right. Until then, make it a great one. I'll see you guys.